The bronze plaque in my hands weighed exactly 12 pounds. I know this because I weighed it later, trying to understand how a piece of cheap metal could cost me $200,000. But at that moment, standing in the dimly lit hallway of Grace Heritage Church, it felt heavy enough to drag me straight through the floor. The air smelled of lemon floor wax and the stale, bitter coffee being served in the reception hall behind me, where 200 people were still clapping for my generosity. I wasn't celebrating, though. I was pressing my ear against a cracked door, holding my breath, listening to the voice of the man I had trusted with my soul. Widows are easy. They just want to believe their pain has a purpose. That was the sentence that ended my life as I knew it. I heard it through a cracked door in the church hallway. I was still clutching the heavy bronze plaque with my dead husband's name on it. A plaque Pastor Rowland had just handed me in front of 200 people at the donor appreciation dinner to silence my questions about why construction hadn't started. It had been 90 days since I gave them the money. 90 days of excuses. And as those words hit me, widows are easy, I realized that the man in the pulpit wasn't a shepherd. He was a wolf. I pressed myself against the wall outside the church kitchen, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The hallway smelled of floor wax and the stale coffee from the reception hall behind me, where the rest of the congregation was still clapping for my generosity. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop. I had just wanted a moment of quiet, a moment to breathe away from the noise of the dinner and the weight of this plaque that felt less like an honor and more like a bribe. But the voices drifting through the cracked door froze me in place. Eugene Kraft's voice cut through the air, low and businesslike. "How is the Carlisle account managing? Roland said she was asking about timelines again yesterday." Delilah Voss responded, her tone sounding like silk wrapped around steel. "She needs handling, Eugene. She's becoming impatient. Roland thinks another grief counseling session might reset her focus on the spiritual legacy aspect. If we can get her crying again, maybe she'll stop asking about the permits." Eugene grunted. "Just make sure it holds until the quarter closes. We can't afford any withdrawals right now, not with the new acquisitions pending in Florida." "Don't worry," Delilah murmured, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Widows are easy. They just want to believe their pain has a purpose." The plaque slipped from my trembling hands. It hit the floor with a metallic clang that shattered the silence like a gunshot. The voices stopped instantly. Then I heard footsteps moving toward the door. I had 3 seconds to decide whether to run or to play the part of the confused, grieving widow they thought I was. I stepped into view just as the door swung open. Delilah's smile snapped into place like a bear trap. "Sister Vivian, we were just discussing the potluck schedule." Eugene nodded, his eyes suddenly too bright. "Your famous casserole, Vivian. Everyone asks about it." My mouth went dry. I just needed the restroom. I feel faint." "Of course," Delilah cooed, touching my arm. "It's been an emotional night. Why don't you go home and rest?" I walked away on legs that barely worked. But to understand how I ended up in that hallway, holding a piece of metal that cost me $200,000, you need to know how it started. You need to know about the day I sold my life for a lie. 3 months earlier, Pastor Roland Hutchins stood beside me at the memorial ceremony, his hand resting on my shoulder. His fingers pressed just a little too hard, claiming ownership and weighing me down like he was anchoring me to the earth. We stood at the front of the sanctuary, facing the congregation that had been my family for a quarter of a century. With his other hand, he gestured toward the architectural rendering mounted on an easel. Glass and steel, basketball courts, computer labs, a safe haven for at-risk youth. It was a building that represented hope, and he sold it beautifully. The Kenneth Carlisle Youth Outreach Center, he had announced to the congregation, his voice booming with righteous passion, vibrating through the wooden floorboards. In memory of your husband, a man who loved this community, a man whose legacy will outlive us all. $200,000. Kenneth's entire life insurance policy. Every penny he had saved from 40 years of working at the plant, every overtime shift, and every skipped vacation, all of it converted into this drawing on an easel. Something about that rendering bothered me even then, although I pushed the feeling down deep into the pit of my stomach. Maybe it was the way it was so perfectly designed, so ready, like Roland had pulled it from a drawer the moment I'd mentioned Kenneth's love of basketball during our first grief counseling session. It looked too smooth and too practiced, like a stock photo in a cheap frame. But grief makes you doubt everything, doesn't it? It creates a fog in your brain where logic goes to die. It makes you doubt your own suspicions because you are desperate for something to feel good again, for something to make sense in a world that has lost its center. The applause crashed over me like waves, loud and demanding. My throat closed up, tight and hot. I didn't want this ceremony, and I didn't want to stand there while people clapped for my grief. I wanted to be home, sitting in Kenneth's chair, smelling his old flannel shirts. But Roland had insisted. He told me that the congregation needed to witness generosity and that my sacrifice would inspire faith in others. What he really meant, I'd later understand, was that other widows needed to see what good victims looked like. They needed to see a woman who was compliant, grateful, and too broken to ask questions about permits or contractors. Roland pulled me into a hug that lasted 3 seconds too long, pressing me against his suit that smelled of expensive cologne and piety. Over his shoulder, I caught sight of Sienna Marsh standing near the side exit. Sienna was Roland's assistant, 31 years old, with hair pulled back so tight it pulled at her eyes, which were like black ice. Sienna wasn't clapping, and she wasn't smiling. She was just watching me, her expression flat and unreadable, tallying something up in her head. She looked at me not with sympathy, but with the cold calculation of an accountant looking at a spreadsheet. I pulled away from Roland, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face. "Thank you, Pastor," I whispered, playing my part. "No, Vivian," he said, his voice amplified by the microphone so everyone could hear his benevolence. "Thank you. Kenneth is smiling down on us today." The reception followed in the fellowship hall. The room reeked of burnt coffee, the kind that's been sitting on a hot plate for 3 hours, mixed with the chemical sweetness of grocery store cookies still in their plastic containers. Someone had tried to make it welcoming with folding tables covered in paper tablecloths printed with crosses, but it just felt cold, like a waiting room for something terrible. I stood by the punch bowl while church members paraded past, gripping my hands with damp palms, their voices blending into meaningless noise. "It's such a beautiful tribute, Vivian. God has a plan for your pain. You're so strong. I don't know how you do it." I nodded and thanked them, feeling like a ghost at my own funeral. Eugene Kraft approached me, smelling of peppermint and Old Spice. He squeezed my hand with both of his. "Kenneth would be so proud," he told me, his eyes crinkling with what looked like affection. "You're building a kingdom, Vivian. This money, it's going to change lives. It's the best investment you could have made." Investment. That was the word he used. Not gift, not offering, investment. I excused myself after 20 minutes, needing just 60 seconds away from the performance, needing to splash cold water on my face before I screamed. That's when I walked down the hallway. That's when I heard them. Widows are easy. I drove home that afternoon with the bronze plaque sitting on the passenger seat like a passenger. The house was quiet when I unlocked the door. That terrible, heavy silence that only exists in a house where 2 people used to live, and now there is only one. I put the plaque on the kitchen table and stared at it. Widows are easy. I wanted to believe I had misunderstood. I wanted to believe they were talking about someone else, or that easy meant easy to comfort. But deep down, in the part of my brain that wasn't fogged by grief, I knew what I had heard. I walked into Kenneth's study. I hadn't moved anything since he died. His reading glasses were still on the desk. His calendar was still turned to the month he passed away. I sat in his chair and looked at the thank you card Roland had sent me weeks ago. It was framed on the desk. Roland's handwriting was elegant and pastoral, the ink flowing smoothly across the heavy cardstock. Your generosity will echo through generations. Kenneth's name will live forever in the lives we touch. The architect's rendering was paperclipped to the back of the frame, the same image from the ceremony. I took it out and laid it flat on the desk under the lamp. I looked at it closely for the first time, really looked at it with eyes that were no longer clouded by tears. It was beautiful. Sunlight glinting off glass windows, happy children playing basketball, and trees that looked full and green. But then I looked at the bottom corner, at the small print I had ignored before. Holloway and Partners, Hartford. I opened Kenneth's laptop. It felt wrong to use it, like I was invading his privacy, but I needed to know. I typed the firm's name into the search bar. The website loaded, looking professional enough, with a portfolio of sleek glass buildings and smiling people in hard hats. It had sections for our team, recent projects, and vision. But as I clicked through the pages, a strange feeling settled in my stomach, heavy and cold. I clicked on recent projects. Every single building listed was located out of state. An office park in Ohio, a library in Arizona, a clinic in Florida. There was nothing local, nothing in Connecticut, nothing I could drive past and verify with my own eyes. I checked the news section, hoping to see an announcement about our church or maybe a press release about the new contract. The last update was from October 2019. That was 3 years ago. My heart started to beat faster. I went to the Our Team page. There were photos of architects, smiling men and women in suits. I right-clicked on the photo of the senior partner, a man named David Holloway, and searched for the image. The results popped up in seconds. It was a stock photo. Portrait of confident businessman in glasses, available for purchase for $12.99. I searched for the other partners. Stock photo, stock photo, stock photo. My hands started shaking so badly I could barely control the mouse. I tried the phone number listed on the contact page. I put my phone on speaker and dialed. It rang and rang and rang and echoed into a void until a generic automated voice, not a receptionist, not a voicemail greeting for a firm, just a robotic voice said, "The subscriber you have dialed is not available. The mailbox is full." I hung up. I sat there in the dark study, illuminated only by the glow of the laptop screen, and I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid. Maybe they were just busy. Maybe they hadn't updated the website. Maybe they used stock photos to protect their privacy. But 3 months crawled by after that ceremony, and nothing happened. Every Sunday, I sat in the same pew, 3 rows from the front, and watched Roland preach about faith and trust. And every Sunday, I waited for an announcement about the youth center, a groundbreaking ceremony, a construction timeline, a shovel in the earth, anything. But nothing came. Just silence. Roland stopped looking at me during sermons. He stopped greeting me at the door. It was subtle, but it was there. A slow, deliberate distancing, like I had served my purpose and was now just clutter he needed to step around. I tried to ignore that coldness for months, telling myself he was just busy doing the Lord's work. But the conversation I overheard in the hallway last night finally snapped the last thread of my denial. The next morning, the fog of grief finally lifted, and I drove to the empty lot behind the church to see exactly what my $200,000 had bought. What I found made my chest tighten until I could barely breathe. There were weeds everywhere, growing waist-high through cracked asphalt, thick and wild like nobody had touched this land in years. There were beer cans scattered near the fence line, bleached white by the sun, evidence of teenagers finding a place to hide. A rusted shopping cart was tipped on its side like a dead animal, half buried in vines, and broken glass glinted in the morning sun, sharp and dangerous. I got out of the car and walked to the chain link fence. I rattled it. It was locked with a rusty padlock that looked like it hadn't been opened since the Bush administration. No construction equipment, no foundation markers, no surveyor flags, no signs of anything except neglect. I pulled out the rendering I kept in my purse, folded into a small square, worn at the creases, and held it up, comparing the glossy image of glass and steel to the rotting reality in front of me. This was the same lot, same angle, same fence line in the background, but there was no youth center, no basketball courts, and no hope, just weeds tall enough to hide a body. The lot suddenly felt wrong, not just abandoned, wrong, like something bad had happened here, like secrets were buried beneath those weeds, under that cracked asphalt. My legs just stopped working. I collapsed right there on the side of the road, with my dress, the one I'd worn to look respectable and competent, soaking up the dust and the dirt. And I laughed. A horrible, broken sound that didn't seem to come from me at all tore from my throat. Because what else do you do when you discover your husband's memorial is literally garbage? When his legacy is beer cans and weeds? I laughed because the alternative was to scream until my throat bled. And somewhere, Roland was probably drinking expensive wine and wearing the suit my money had bought, sitting in air conditioning while I sat in the dirt. Back home, desperation pushed me to the phone. I called the church office, my hands trembling. "You've reached Pastor Roland Hutchins." I left a message. Then I called again the next day, and the next. For 4 days, I lived in a silence so loud it made my ears ring. I sat by the phone like a jilted teenager, waiting for the man who had promised to honor my husband to simply acknowledge I existed. But the church had become a fortress. When Sienna finally answered on the 4th day, her voice wasn't warm anymore. It was like a door slamming shut. "Pastor Hutchins is in meetings," she said, her tone clipped and bored. "I'm not involved in facility planning, Mrs. Carlisle." She didn't even call me Sister Vivian anymore. I had been demoted from family to nuisance in the span of a week. "Put him on," I demanded, my voice shaking. "I know he's there." "He is unavailable." Click. That evening, Roland finally called back. He didn't apologize. He didn't ask how I was. He launched straight into a rehearsed speech about permitting issues and zoning complications, listing excuses like items on a grocery list. I cut him off. "The lot is empty, Roland. The architect firm is fake. Where is my money?" The silence that followed lasted exactly 7 seconds. I counted everyone. When he finally spoke, the pastoral warmth was gone. His voice was tight, clipped, and urgent. "Vivian, stop," he interrupted. "You are spiraling, and you don't have the full picture. If you want transparency, come to the board meeting this Monday night, 7 p.m. We will lay out all the documentation, and we will put these accusations to rest." He hung up before I could say yes or no. It sounded like an olive branch, but as I stood there listening to the dial tone, it felt more like a summons. I sat at our kitchen table, the same table where Kenneth and I had signed our wills, planned vacations, and argued about paint colors. Now I sat there alone, staring at his photo on the mantle as something inside me cracked. Not broke, cracked, like ice before it shatters completely. The next morning, I didn't wait for the board meeting. I couldn't. I drove to the Fairfield County Planning Office. The building smelled like old paper and fluorescent lighting. That particular scent of bureaucracy that clings to government offices everywhere. I took a number and waited for 45 minutes on a hard plastic chair, my leg bouncing nervously. When my number was called, I walked to the counter. A clerk looked up from her computer, her reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She looked tired. "I need to check permit applications for Grace Heritage Church," I said, sliding a piece of paper with the address across the counter. Specifically for a new youth center or gymnasium. She typed something, her fingers clicking rhythmically across the keyboard. She scrolled through databases, clicked through several screens, and frowned. What dates? She asked. Anytime in the last 6 months, or the last year. More clicking. She squinted at the screen. Her expression shifted from neutral to puzzled. There's nothing here. No permit applications filed for that address. No zoning requests. No architectural plans submitted to the county. Nothing in our system for the past 18 months. The room tilted slightly. I gripped the counter for support. Can you check again? I persisted, my voice rising. They're supposed to be building a youth center. It's a huge project, $200,000. She stopped typing and looked at me. Her eyes softened with pity. Ma'am, I'm looking at the master file. There are absolutely no permit applications filed for that address. Nothing at all. If they were planning to break ground, they would have needed environmental surveys, drainage permits, and zoning variances. There would be a paper trail a mile long. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice so the people in line behind me couldn't hear. Are you sure about the address? Sometimes churches use off-site locations for expansion projects. I'm sure, I whispered. It's the lot right behind the sanctuary. Then there is no project, she said simply. She wrote down a number on a slip of paper and slid it across the counter. If you think something's wrong, if money has changed hands for construction that isn't permitted, you might want to call the building inspector's office. They handle complaints about unpermitted construction. She paused, then added quietly, But, ma'am, if nothing's being built and someone told you it was, well, you might want to check your bank records first, and maybe call a lawyer. She didn't finish, didn't need to. I thanked her and left before the tears came. I sat in my car in the parking lot for a long time, hands trembling, that slip of paper stuck to my palm like evidence of something I didn't want to name. Roland hadn't just delayed the project. He hadn't even started it. There were no permits because there was no building. There was no environmental study because there was no architect. It was all a lie. A $200,000 lie. And on Monday night, I was going to have to walk into a room full of people I had trusted for 25 years and accuse them of stealing my husband's legacy. Monday night arrived like an execution date. I walked into the church conference room with a folder thick with evidence, printed bank statements, the architect's rendering, notes from the planning office, and the entire timeline of Roland's evasions. I'd spent the weekend preparing, organizing, and building a case that I foolishly believed couldn't be dismissed by reasonable people. The room was cold, smelling of stale air conditioning and lemon polish. 5 board members sat across the long mahogany table like a firing squad. Something felt choreographed about this meeting. The way they sat, the way they all stopped talking the moment I entered, and the way their expressions were already set to sympathetic but firm. It was like they had rehearsed this entire encounter while I was driving over. Roland sat at the center, looking every inch the aggrieved leader. Eugene Kraft was to his right, his silver hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights, his hands folded on the table. Delilah Voss sat on his left, her manicured nails drumming a silent, impatient rhythm against the wood. Next to them were Garrett Sloan, the treasurer, with a face that looked carved from stone, and Phoebe Whitlock, the secretary, barely 30 years old, taking notes on a yellow legal pad without looking up. I didn't sit. I stayed standing at the end of the table while I spread my documents out fan style so they couldn't ignore them. The youth center was supposed to break ground 4 months ago, I began, keeping my voice steady despite the trembling in my knees. The lot is empty. The county has no record of any permit applications, zoning requests, or environmental surveys. And the architectural firm on this rendering hasn't been active since 2019. I looked directly at Roland. I want to know where my $200,000 went. Roland's face arranged itself into that expression, the one I'd seen him use on dying congregants, on grieving families, and on anyone vulnerable enough to need comfort. It was gentle, pastoral, and practiced. His head tilted slightly to the left, his eyes soft with manufactured concern. "Vivian," he said, his voice dropping to a soothing baritone. "I understand you're grieving. Loss does terrible things to our minds. It makes us see threats where none exist. These accusations you're making, they are coming from a place of pain, not fact." "I'm not accusing anyone of anything," I interrupted, pointing at the planning office report. "I'm asking a simple question about where my donation went. If there are no permits, there is no building. If there is no building, where is the money?" "You're implying fraud," Eugene said, leaning forward. His voice was measured but firm, the voice of a man used to being obeyed. "That's a very serious allegation to make against a church and its leadership, Vivian. This is dangerous ground. Is it fraud when someone takes money for a project that never materializes?" Delilah's smile could have sold poison as medicine. It was sweet, concerned, and dripping with false compassion as she answered. "Vivian, sweetheart, we're all worried about you. The things you've been saying to people, this behavior, it isn't the woman we've known for all these years. You're spiraling." "What things? What behavior?" Eugene shifted in his chair, exchanging a look with Roland. The constant phone calls to the church office, the hostile tone with our staff, the unfounded accusations about financial impropriety. "Sienna was in tears yesterday." My stomach dropped. Sienna, the woman with eyes like black ice, in tears? They were twisting everything. Hostile. I've been asking legitimate questions about a donation I made. "That could be considered harassment," Eugene interrupted, his voice hardening, losing the veneer of friendship, "and publicly questioning the integrity of church leadership could be construed as slander and defamation of character. We'd really hate to see this escalate into legal territory." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Legal territory. They were threatening to sue me for asking where my own money went. Garrett slid a printed ledger across the table. It was a single page with line items in neat columns. Youth programs, community initiatives, and facility improvements. Numbers that could mean anything or mean nothing. "This is too vague," I said, scanning the document. "I need to see actual receipts. Contracts. Real evidence of where the money was spent. This piece of paper proves nothing." Roland's face hardened, the pastoral warmth evaporating completely to reveal the predator beneath. "Are you accusing me of theft, Vivian?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. 5 board members stared at me like I'd just confessed to a crime instead of reporting one. Their faces were united, closed, and defensive. I realized then that I hadn't walked into a meeting. I had walked into an ambush they'd carefully prepared. "I'm asking for transparency," I said, maintaining my ground though I felt sick. Phoebe stopped taking notes. She reached into a folder and slid a single sheet of paper across the table toward me. "Clarification agreement" was printed at the top in bold letters. It contained legal language I'd need a lawyer to decode, but the bottom line was crystal clear. Sign this document. Admit your donation was given freely with no strings attached. Withdraw all allegations of financial misuse. And this unpleasantness ends right now. Roland's voice went quiet, almost gentle. "Sign it, Vivian. We'll forget any of this happened. You can move forward and heal properly from Kenneth's death. And we can be a family again." I looked at each face around that table. Eugene, the man who'd hugged me at Kenneth's funeral and told me my husband was with the angels now. Delilah, who'd organized the memorial luncheon and held my hand during the eulogy. Garrett, who'd promised me the youth center would be a lasting tribute to Kenneth's memory. And Phoebe, young enough to be my daughter, taking notes like this was just another routine meeting. 5 people I'd trusted for years. 5 people who'd chosen to protect Roland over seeking the truth. Five faces united in purpose, in strategy, and in the willingness to gaslight a grieving widow into silence. I stood up straighter. I gathered my documents, putting them back into my folder with deliberate slowness. I left the unsigned agreement sitting on the table. I'm not signing anything, I said, and I'm not done asking questions. I walked out of that conference room with my hands shaking so badly I could barely push through the church doors into the parking lot. The night air was cold, but I was sweating. I fumbled with my car keys, dropped them on the asphalt, picked them up, and finally got the door unlocked. I slid into the driver's seat and locked the doors immediately. I turned the key in the ignition. Nothing. The engine didn't turn over. Not even a click. The dashboard lights didn't flicker. It was dead silence, but the battery was fine 2 hours ago. I'd driven here without any issues at all. I tried again, twisting the key so hard I thought it might snap. Nothing. My hands started shaking harder. I looked back at the church building. Through the window of Roland's office, the blinds were open. I could see him standing there, backlit by the interior lights, his phone pressed to his ear. He was watching me, not hiding it, not pretending he wasn't there, just standing there watching. And when our eyes met across that dark parking lot, he smiled. Not a nervous smile, not an apologetic smile. It was the victorious smile of a man who just demonstrated his power. A man who had just shown me he could strand me anywhere, anytime. A man who wanted me to know that for every move I made, he had a countermove ready. I pulled out my phone to call a tow truck, my fingers trembling so badly I could barely hold it. That's when I noticed the notification from an unknown number, a text message, sent 3 minutes ago while I was still walking out of the building. Your car won't start. Neither will your resistance. Sign the agreement or things get much worse. I looked back at the window. Roland was gone. That night, after the tow truck dropped me off and I locked every deadbolt in my house, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my living room with the lights off, watching the street through the blinds. At 3 a.m., I was still sitting in the dark in my bedroom, staring at my laptop. I wanted to search for help, but paranoia whispered that if they could disable my car, they could monitor my Wi-Fi as well. I walked to the living room and unplugged the router, turned off my phone's Wi-Fi connection, switched to cellular data, and huddled in the corner of the room where the neighbors couldn't see the glow of the screen. My thumb hovered over the search bar and I typed, Private Investigator Connecticut Financial Fraud. The results loaded slowly. Then I saw it. Fletcher Hale, a retired cop, specialized in financial fraud. No social media presence. No flashy website promising results. Just a phone number and 3 words that made my decision for me. I find liars. My finger hovered over the call button. This was the moment, the point of no return. Once I hired an investigator, this would stop being about a delayed construction project and would become about a criminal investigation, about accusations I couldn't take back, and about burning bridges I'd spent 25 years building. Was I ready for that? I thought about the empty lot, the weeds, the broken glass, the architect firm that had been defunct for 3 years, Roland's smile through that window, and the dead engine. I pressed call. He answered on the first ring, his voice gravelly and awake. Fletcher. I need help, I said, my voice cracking. My church stole $200,000 from me, and I think they're going to kill me if I keep asking questions. There was a moment of silence on the other end. Then, where are you right now? I'm at home, I whispered. I have a chair wedged under the front doorknob. I'm afraid to leave. Good. Don't leave. I'm coming to you. I'll be in your driveway in 20 minutes. Do not open that door for anyone until I call your phone to tell you I'm outside. He showed up in 18 minutes. I saw his headlights cut through the darkness, and then my phone buzzed. I'm outside, he said. Come to the car. If they're watching your Wi-Fi, they might have ears in the house too. My car is clean. That thought that my own walls might be listening propelled me forward. I moved the chair, unlocked the door, and sprinted across the lawn in my slippers, diving into the passenger seat of the idling vehicle. It was an old Chevy with coffee-stained seats and the faint smell of cigarettes that had probably been smoked years ago, but never quite left the upholstery. For the first time in hours, I felt safe. Fletcher Hale was 60-something years old, with a gray beard that had probably been dark once, and eyes that had seen too much of humanity's worst behavior. He didn't waste time with pleasantries or small talk. Tell me everything from the beginning, and don't leave anything out. So I did. I told him about the donation, the memorial ceremony, the fake rendering, the empty lot, the defunct architect firm, the planning office visit, Roland's evasions, the board meeting, the threats, and the disabled car. I gave him everything. The documents I had brought with me, the timeline, the names of board members, and my growing suspicion that others might have been targeted the same way. Fletcher took notes in a small notebook, his handwriting surprisingly neat for someone with such large hands. He asked sharp questions that cut through my rambling and never once looked at me like I was crazy, vindictive, or an angry widow making trouble. When I finally finished, he leaned back in his seat and was quiet for a moment, watching the night lights reflect off the hood of his car. "How long will this take?" I asked. "Depends on how careful they've been," he said. "If it's what I think it is, they'll have covered their tracks pretty thoroughly. But everyone makes mistakes eventually. Give me a week." What do I do in the meantime? Nothing. Don't confront anyone else. Don't make any more phone calls to the church. Don't visit the property. And for God's sake, don't go anywhere alone at night. You think I'm actually in danger? Fletcher's expression darkened in a way that made my blood run cold. "I think you've backed a predator into a corner, Mrs. Carlyle. And cornered predators are the most dangerous kind." 3 days later, Fletcher called with a tone in his voice I hadn't heard before. Not quite urgent, but focused. "Meet me at the diner. 30 miles from your house, different county, and no chance of running into anyone from church." I drove there on a Friday morning, checking my rearview mirror the entire way, half convinced I was being followed, even though the road behind me stayed empty. The diner smelled like decades of grease and coffee, the kind of smell that clings to your clothes for hours after you leave. Fletcher was already there in a corner booth, his laptop open, and a folder on the table that looked thick enough to be used as a weapon. Our booth had duct tape covering a rip in the vinyl seat, and the laminate table was sticky, despite having obviously been wiped down recently. He didn't waste time. "First thing," Fletcher said, sliding a small electronic component across the table toward me. It looked like a fuse. "This was in your car the night of that board meeting. Under the hood, it's a starter relay fuse." I stared at the small piece of metal. "What does that mean?" "It means someone didn't just get lucky that your car died. Someone pulled this relay out to disable the ignition, waited until you called the tow truck, and then, or maybe they just kept it. Did you get the car fixed?" The mechanic said the relay was missing. He thought it vibrated loose. "Relays don't vibrate loose," Fletcher said grimly. "Someone popped the hood and took it. It takes about 30 seconds if you know what you're doing. No damage. Clean. It's the kind of trick you use when you need to strand someone to send a message." My stomach dropped. I remembered Roland standing in the window. The smile, the text. It was all orchestrated. "What else did you find?" I asked. "A lot," he said, his voice low. "And none of it is good." He spread documents across the sticky table. Not the definitive proof I was hoping for, but a web of connections that painted a disturbing picture. "I started digging into the Holloway and Partners firm," he explained, pointing to a corporate registration document. "The LLC was dissolved in 2019, just like you suspected, but the registered agent for the company at the time of dissolution." He slid another paper over it. A name I didn't recognize. A man named Marcus Thorne, a real estate lawyer out of New Haven. Who is he? I asked. That's the interesting part, Fletcher said. I ran his name. He's the same lawyer who handles all of Grace Heritage Church's property acquisitions, and he's currently listed as the registered agent for 3 other LLCs that have received significant wire transfers from the church's general fund in the last 2 years. My stomach tightened. What does that mean? It means money is moving out of the church, Fletcher said, his eyes hard. Large amounts of it, and going into companies that exist only on paper, Cornerstone Development, Grace Investments. They all sound legitimate, but they have no employees, no offices, and they are all managed by the same lawyer who helped dissolve the fake architect firm. Is that illegal? Not necessarily. Churches can invest, but here is where it gets ugly. He pulled up a list on his laptop. I found public records for property taxes. These shell companies, they've been buying residential real estate, condos, vacation homes, all paid for in cash. So they're stealing the money and buying houses? It looks that way, but proving it is the hard part. We have the where, but we don't have the who. I can't prove Roland controls those accounts without a warrant or a subpoena, and we can't get a warrant without a victim willing to go on record. My phone suddenly rang. An unknown number. I answered without thinking, my hand moving automatically. Roland's voice came through, but it was different now. No warmth, no pastoral gentleness, just cold calculation. This was the real Roland, the one I'd never met in 25 years of church membership. Fletcher Hale is a disgraced cop who lost his license for falsifying evidence, Roland said calmly. Anything he's told you is poison from a corrupted source. You can verify that with a simple Google search. Every hair on my arm stood up. He knew. He knew I'd hired Fletcher. He knew his name, and he knew we were sitting in this diner right now, which meant he'd been watching me even closer than I'd realized. I'm trying to protect you, Vivian, Roland continued, to save you from destroying yourself, but you're making it very difficult. Come to my office tomorrow morning, alone. We'll sort this out before you do something you'll deeply regret, before you become liable for slander charges that will bankrupt you. Click. The line went dead. Fletcher looked at me across the table, my face pale with shock. What did he say? He knows, I whispered. He knows I hired you. He knows you're here. Fletcher didn't flinch. Good. That means he's scared. The next morning, I didn't go to Roland's office. I drove to the police station in Bridgeport, 2 towns over, where nobody knew Grace Heritage Church. I walked in with Fletcher's folder clutched under my arm and asked to speak with someone in financial crimes. The detective who took my statement was younger than I expected, with sharp eyes and a tired demeanor. His name was Detective Cruz. He listened to my entire story, made notes, and studied Fletcher's documents with careful attention. Then he leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled under his chin in a way that made my stomach sink. Financial fraud cases are extremely complicated, Mrs. Carlyle, he said slowly, especially when they involve religious organizations. There are First Amendment protections to consider. Separation of church and state issues makes auditing their books difficult. But he stole from me, I said. $200,000. What you have here is compelling, Cruz interrupted gently, but it's circumstantial. Property purchases aren't illegal. Shell companies aren't illegal in themselves unless we can prove the money was obtained by deception. And right now, all we have is a delayed construction project. It's not delayed. It's fake. I understand how it looks, but without direct access to church financial records, which I can't get without probable cause, it's your word against a pastor with a clean record and 40 character witnesses who will testify to his good works. My hands clenched into fists under the table. So you're saying he can just get away with it? Cruz leaned forward, his voice softening. I'm saying that prosecutors are often very hesitant to pursue cases that could be painted as religious persecution. Churches have lawyers, good ones, and juries tend to trust pastors over angry widows. The words hit me like a physical slap. Angry widows. That's what I'd become his eyes. I'll open a file, he said, handing me a card. But unless more victims come forward, or unless you find a smoking gun, this likely won't go far. I left the police station feeling like I'd swallowed broken glass. That Sunday, I went to Grace Heritage Church. It felt like walking into enemy territory with a target on my back. I sat in my usual pew, 3 rows from the front on the left side, the same seat Kenneth and I had occupied for 25 years. Now just me, with empty space beside me that felt like a canyon. Roland's sermon was about forgiveness, about letting go of bitterness, and about trusting God's plan even when we couldn't understand it. His eyes found mine 3 times during the message. Each time felt like a warning shot. After the service ended, I tried to approach Beverly Hutchins, Roland's wife. She was mid-40s, taught Sunday school, and organized the women's ministry. A sweet woman. "Beverly," I said, catching her in the hallway, "I need to talk to you about the youth center." Beverly's face went very still. She reached out and touched my hand with practiced sympathy. "Oh, Vivian, Roland told me you've been struggling. Grief can twist our perception of things, can't it?" She squeezed my hand. "But spreading rumors? It's hurting people, Vivian. People are starting to doubt Roland's leadership because of what you're saying. Is that really what you want? To destroy the church because you're having trouble processing Kenneth's death?" I pulled my hand away. "This isn't about grief. This is about money." Beverly's expression shifted. Something colder flickered behind her eyes. "I think you should take a break from church for a while. Get some professional help," she said as she walked away. That night, my phone started ringing. One call after another. The screen lit up with names I'd known for decades, women I'd served with on committees, men who'd sat in the pew behind us, all calling to deliver the same message. Patricia Kent called first. We'd served on the hospitality committee together for 10 years. "I don't know what you think you're doing," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "But Roland has been nothing but kind to you. Kenneth would be ashamed of you right now." The line went dead. Then Andrew Webb, the youth pastor. "Sister Vivian, I'm worried about you. This behavior, it isn't like you. Please get some help." 7 more calls came after that. By midnight, I sat in the dark of my living room, understanding settling over me like a burial shroud. I was completely alone. My entire social circle, built over 25 years, had been weaponized against me. The next morning, I needed groceries. I was reaching for apples in the produce section when I spotted Patricia Kent inspecting tomatoes about 3 feet away. "Patricia," I called out. She turned her cart and headed down a different aisle without a word. I followed her. "Patricia, please, just let me explain." She walked faster. "Patricia," she stopped, turned around. Her face was hard as stone. "My daughter goes to that church, Vivian. My grandchildren attend Sunday school there. You think I'm going to risk their spiritual home because you can't handle your grief?" Her voice got louder. People stopped shopping to stare. "Pastor Roland is a good man, and you are repaying his kindness with vicious lies. Kenneth would be absolutely ashamed." She walked away, leaving me standing there in the produce section with strangers staring. On Thursday afternoon, I came home to find an envelope taped to my front door. No postage, no return address. Inside was a single photograph. Me, sitting in that corner booth at the diner 30 miles from home. Across from me was Fletcher. The image was zoomed in close enough to see the documents on the table. The photo had been taken from outside, through the diner window. They had followed me. They had watched us. I turned the photograph over. One sentence, handwritten in unfamiliar script. "Fletcher can't protect you." I looked up at the street. It was empty, but somewhere out there someone was watching. And I realized then that I wasn't just fighting for my money anymore. I was fighting for my life. That photograph on my door changed everything. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I spent the next 48 hours sitting in my living room with the lights off, watching the street through the blinds, waiting for them to come back. Then, at 11:30 p.m. on a Tuesday, my phone rang, but it wasn't the blocked number I feared. It was Fletcher. "Put your shoes on," he said, his voice low and crackling with static. "I'm outside." "What's happening?" I whispered, my heart leaping into my throat. "Is it Roland? Is he here?" "No, but I found where he goes on Tuesday nights." "You wanted proof, Vivian? You wanted to know where the money went? Come outside. I'm taking you to see it." I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my coat and slipped out the back door, moving through the shadows of my own garden like a thief. Fletcher's beat-up Chevy was idling in the alley behind my house, with the headlights off and the engine humming quietly. I climbed into the passenger seat, and the smell of stale tobacco and old leather wrapped around me. "Where are we going?" I asked as he pulled onto the main road, keeping his speed slow to avoid drawing attention. "Litchfield County," Fletcher said. "About 40 minutes north. I told you about the shell companies, right? Cornerstone Development? Grace Investments?" "Yes." "Well, Cornerstone just bought a property 3 months ago. Paid cash, $600,000. The deed lists the owner as a corporate entity, but the utilities? The electric bill is being sent to a P.O. box registered to Eugene Kraft." "Eugene?" I felt a wave of nausea. Eugene Kraft, the head of the Benevolence Committee, the man who handed out food baskets at Thanksgiving. He's part of this? "They're all part of it, Vivian. You don't run a scam this big alone. Roland is the face, but Eugene handles the logistics. And tonight, we're going to see what $600,000 of widow's money looks like." The drive was silent and tense. We left the suburban streetlights behind and headed into the dark, winding roads of Litchfield, where the houses were set back from the road behind stone walls and iron gates. This was old money territory. This was where people went when they didn't want to be found. Fletcher killed the headlights as we turned onto a private lane. The gravel crunched softly under the tires. He pulled the car into a cluster of trees about 50 yards from the end of the road and killed the engine. "We walk from here," he said. "Stay close and be quiet." We walked through the woods, the wet leaves soaking through my sneakers. The air was cold and smelled of pine and damp earth. I felt ridiculous, a 61-year-old woman creeping through the bushes in the middle of the night. But the anger in my chest was keeping me warm. "There," Fletcher whispered, pointing through a gap in the trees. I looked, and my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a house, it was a mansion. It was a sprawling, modern farmhouse with floor-to-ceiling windows, a wraparound porch, and a 3-car garage. It was beautiful. It was pristine. It looked like something out of a magazine. And it was lit up like a Christmas tree. "That's Kenneth's money," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "That roof, those windows, that's Kenneth's life insurance. And Tessa's money," Fletcher added grimly. "And Lenora's, and everyone else's." We crept closer, staying in the shadow of the tree line until we had a clear view of the driveway. There were 3 cars parked there. I recognized them immediately. There was Roland's black Mercedes, the one he claimed was a lease provided by the diocese. There was Eugene's SUV. And there was a red sports car I had seen Sienna Marsh driving once, although she usually parked it blocks away from the church to maintain her humble appearance. "They're all here," I said. "What are they doing?" "Celebrating," Fletcher said. "It's the end of the quarter. They're splitting the take." He pulled a camera with a massive telephoto lens out of his jacket, braced it against a tree trunk, and started snapping photos. The shutter clicked softly, a rhythmic sound in the quiet night. I moved slightly to get a better angle through the front window. The curtains were open, arrogant, and careless men who thought they were untouchable. That was when I saw Roland. He was standing in the living room, holding a crystal tumbler of amber liquid. He wasn't wearing his collar, he was wearing a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. And he was laughing, his head thrown back, looking relaxed and wealthy. Then Eugene walked into the frame. He was carrying a briefcase. He set it on the coffee table and opened it. I couldn't see exactly what was inside, but I saw Roland reach in and pull out a stack of papers, or maybe cash. He fanned it out, showing it to someone sitting on the couch. Sienna stood up from the couch. She took the stack from Roland and kissed him. I gasped, clamping my hand over my mouth. It wasn't a friendly kiss. It wasn't a pastoral kiss. It was intimate and possessive. Did you get that? I hissed at Fletcher. I got it, he said, the camera clicking rapidly. The assistant and the pastor. Classic leverage. If she goes down, she takes him with her. If he goes down, she loses the lifestyle. Mutually assured destruction. I watched them. I watched the people I had prayed with, the people I had trusted with my soul, drinking expensive scotch in a house bought with stolen grief. I thought about the weeds growing in the empty lot back home with the broken glass and the rusted shopping cart. They're monsters, I whispered. No, Fletcher corrected me, lowering the camera. They're worse. Monsters are scary because they're irrational. These people are rational. They have a business plan, and they have spreadsheets. They sat down and calculated exactly how much your pain was worth, and then they spent it on real estate. Suddenly, the front door opened. We both froze, pressing ourselves flat against the rough bark of the oak trees. Roland stepped out onto the porch, lighting a cigar. The flame flared in the darkness, illuminating his face. He looked out toward the woods, staring directly into the darkness where we were hiding. He didn't see us. It was too dark. But he stood there for a long time, smoking and surveying his kingdom. He looked satisfied, like a man who had won the game and knew nobody could touch him. We need to go, Fletcher breathed into my ear. If they have security cameras on the perimeter, we're trespassing. We backed away slowly, step by careful step, until we were deep enough in the woods to turn and walk. We didn't speak until we were back in the car, speeding down the winding roads away from the house that grief built. But the night wasn't over. As Fletcher drove me back toward town, his phone rang. It was connected to the car's Bluetooth, so his voice filled the cabin. Hale, he answered. Mr. Hale, a voice said. It wasn't Roland. It was a voice I didn't recognize. Smooth, deep, and heavily distorted. You have a taillight out. Fletcher frowned, checking his dashboard. Who is this? You're driving a 2014 Chevy Impala, the voice continued. You're currently southbound on Route 202. You have a female passenger. Vivian Carlisle, I presume? My blood ran cold. Fletcher slammed on the brakes, pulling the car onto the shoulder. Listen to me. No, you listen, the voice cut him off. You are poking a bear, Mr. Hale. You think you're a detective? You're a security guard with a suspended license. We know about the photos. We know about the diner, and we know you're dropping Mrs. Carlisle off at 42 Elm Street. My address. If you value her safety, the voice said, you will delete the photos you just took. You will turn the car around, and you will tell Mrs. Carlisle that the investigation is over. Or what? Fletcher snarled. Or we stop being polite. The fuse in her car was a warning. The next time, we won't just disable the engine. We'll cut the brakes. The line went dead. Fletcher sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, his breathing heavy in the silence of the car. They were tracking us, I whispered. How were they tracking us? My phone, Fletcher said, cursing. He grabbed his cell phone and powered it down, then threw it into the back seat. Or a tracker on the car. I swept it yesterday, but they must have planted it tonight while we were in the woods. They know we were there. They know we saw them. Yes. So they know we have proof. Photos aren't proof of theft, Vivian, Fletcher said, starting the car again and peeling back onto the road. Photos just prove they have money. They can claim it's personal wealth. They can claim it's legitimate investments. That call? That was a bluff. They're trying to scare us off because they know we're close, but they don't know what we have. He glanced at me. Are you scared? I'm terrified, I admitted. Good. Fear keeps you alert. But we aren't stopping. Tonight proved one thing: the money exists. It hasn't been spent on gambling or drugs. It's in real estate. That means it's recoverable. If we win, we can get your money back. He drove me home, taking a convoluted route, doubling back 3 times to make sure we weren't being followed. He walked me to my door and waited until I was inside with the deadbolt thrown. Lock the windows, he told me. All of them. Put a chair under the doorknob. And Vivian? Yes? Tomorrow, buy a gun. Or a big dog. Because that voice on the phone? He wasn't bluffing about the brakes. I stood in my hallway, listening to Fletcher's car drive away, leaving me alone in the silence of my house. I did what he said. I checked every window. I wedged a dining chair under the front door handle. But as I stood there in the dark, I realized that the fear I felt wasn't just about my safety anymore. It was about the injustice of it all. I thought about Roland sipping scotch in his $1 million farmhouse while I ate generic cereal to save money. I thought about Sienna kissing him while wearing a dress bought with my husband's death benefit. The fear was there, yes, but underneath the fear, something else was hardening, something hotter and stronger. They thought the phone call would break me. They thought seeing their power would make me run. But they were wrong. Seeing the house didn't make me want to quit. It made me want to burn it down. I went to the kitchen and made a pot of coffee. I wasn't going to sleep tonight. I sat down at the table with my list of names, the other widows I hadn't called yet, and I picked up the pen. If they wanted a war, I would give them an army. That night, sleep was impossible. The adrenaline from the stakeout had faded, leaving behind a cold, shivering fear. I lay in bed, clutching the duvet, listening to every sound the old house made, but all I could hear was that distorted voice on the phone. The next time, we won't just disable the engine, we'll cut the brakes. The settling of the foundation suddenly sounded like footsteps, and the wind, moving through the oak trees, sounded like whispers. Every car that passed on the street made my heart race, with my eyes always darting to the sliver of light coming through the curtains. At 2 a.m, I heard it. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the house settling. It was the distinct and heavy creak of wood under weight. Someone was on the front porch. I stopped breathing and lay perfectly still, straining my ears. There was a creak, then a pause, then another creak. Steps. Slow and deliberate steps moving from the stairs toward the door. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, my hands shaking so violently I almost dropped it. I dialed 911, pressing the phone to my ear, whispering so quietly I could barely hear myself. 911, what is your emergency? Someone is outside, I whispered. Someone is on my porch. I think they're trying to get in. Ma'am, can you see anyone? No, but I can hear them. They're at the door now. Are your doors locked? Yes, all of them. Stay on the line with me. Officers are dispatched. They are about 3 minutes away. 3 minutes. It felt like a lifetime. I heard the doorknob jiggle. Not a violent rattling, but a slow, testing turn. Someone was checking to see if I had made a mistake. Someone was checking to see if I was careless. Then the footsteps moved. They left the door and moved to the right toward the living room window. I heard a scratching sound like metal against the screen. I slid out of bed and crawled onto the floor, wedging myself between the nightstand and the wall. I thought about the Cornerstone Development Shell Company. I thought about the millions of dollars missing, and I thought about what men who steal that kind of money do to the women who catch them. Then, silence. The scratching stopped. The footsteps retreated, faster this time, thudding down the porch stairs and running into the grass. By the time the police arrived, with their flashing blue lights cutting through my curtains, the porch was empty. 2 officers searched my yard with flashlights, their beams cutting through the darkness, and found nothing. No footprints in the flower beds beneath my windows because the ground was dry. No signs of forced entry, and no evidence that anyone had been there at all. The younger officer was sympathetic, taking notes and nodding. But the older one, a man with 20 years on the force and eyes that looked tired, looked at me like he'd watched this exact movie before. "You really should install security cameras, ma'am," he said, handing me a pamphlet on home safety. "Might give you some peace of mind." "I heard someone," I insisted, wrapping my robe tighter around myself. "They were right there. They tried the door." "I'm sure you heard something, ma'am. Old houses make noise. Wind does strange things." He paused, choosing his words carefully, the way people do when they're trying to be diplomatic to a hysterical woman. "Have you been under any unusual stress lately? Any major life changes? Recent loss of a loved one, perhaps?" And there it was. The implication hanging in the air between us like smoke. She's a grieving widow. She's paranoid. She's imagining things. "I'm not crazy," I said quietly. "No one's saying you're crazy, ma'am. But grief, it does strange things to the senses. It makes us hyper-vigilant and makes us hear things that might not be threats." He pulled out a business card and handed it to me. "This is a crisis counselor, someone you can talk to about what you've been going through. Might help with the anxiety." Then they left. I stood alone in my empty house, holding a crisis counselor's business card and understanding with perfect clarity that even the police didn't believe me. Roland's narrative had reached them before I ever said a word. Friday morning brought a new nightmare. I saw the mailman deliver a thick envelope. It had official letterhead from a Hartford law firm I'd never heard about. My hands shook as I opened it at the kitchen table. It was a cease and desist. The words were printed in bold at the top. The legal language that followed was dense, threatening, and designed to terrify, but the core message was brutally clear. Stop making defamatory accusations against Pastor Roland Hutchins and the Grace Heritage Church Board of Directors immediately, or face a civil lawsuit for damages exceeding $500,000. $500,000. I sat down on the floor, the letter crumpling in my hand, and did the math. I had to. I needed to see exactly how they were planning to destroy me. The house was worth maybe $280,000 if I sold it quickly, and quickly meant taking a lowball offer. Kenneth's retirement account had another $90,000, but early withdrawal meant penalties and taxes, so maybe I'd see $60,000. I had $23,000 in savings left after the donation. $280 plus $60 plus $23 equals $363,000. I was still $137,000 short, and that was before my own legal fees, which could easily run another $50,000 or more. Even if I liquidated absolutely everything, every single thing Kenneth and I had built together over 27 years of marriage, I'd still be bankrupt and would be destitute. And they weren't just threatening to sue me. They were also threatening to make me homeless, to destroy any possibility of financial stability for the rest of my life, and to take away not just what Roland had already stolen, but everything else I had left to survive. And that was precisely the point. They didn't need to win the lawsuit. Just filing it would force me to spend every dime I had to defend myself, and force me to choose between justice and survival. I called Fletcher. It took 3 tries before my hands were steady enough to dial the number correctly. "They're suing me," I gasped when he answered. $500,000. "Fletcher, I don't have $500,000. If they actually file this lawsuit, I'll lose the house." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "It's a standard intimidation tactic, Vivian," he said finally, his voice calm but serious. "Cease and desist letters are cheap to send. It costs them the price of a stamp to scare you to death. It doesn't necessarily mean they'll file." "But they could," I said, They have the money to drag this out forever. I don't. Yes, they could. So what am I supposed to do? If I stop, they win. If I keep going, I lose everything. We keep building the case, Fletcher said. We get other victims on record. We gather enough evidence so that when we go public, it's not defamation. It's news. Truth is an absolute defense against libel, Vivian. If we can prove he stole the money, then the lawsuit dissolves. And if we can't prove it, then we fight, he said grimly. But you need to be careful. These people are escalating. First the car, then the stalking, now the legal threats. They are trying to break you before we find the smoking gun. I knew I couldn't fight this alone anymore. If it was just my word against Roland's, I would lose. I needed an army. That afternoon, I did something desperate. I pulled out the old church directories I had saved, stacks of them going back 10 years. I started looking at names. I looked for women whose husbands had died in recent years, women who used to be active in the church but had quietly drifted away, women who might have been targeted the same way I was. I made a list of 5 names. Then I sat there staring at that list for over an hour, the phone in my hand, completely unable to make the first call. What was I even going to say? Hi, I think we've both been conned by our pastor. Did you happen to donate large sums of money that mysteriously disappeared into thin air? They'd think I was insane. They'd call Roland immediately to report me, and they'd add their voices to the chorus of people telling me to get psychiatric help. But what if just one of them listened? What if one of them said yes? I picked up the phone and dialed the first number before I could talk myself out of it. Lenora Whitfield. 3 rings. 4. Then a woman's voice, elderly and cautious. Hello? Hi, I said, my voice trembling. My name is Vivian Carlisle. I'm a member of Grace Heritage Church. I'm calling because I think something happened to me that might have happened to you as well. Silence on the other end. Heavy, breathing silence. I donated money to the church for a project that never materialized, I continued, the words tumbling out faster now. And when I started asking questions about where the money went, I was told I was imagining things. That grief was making me paranoid. But I don't think I'm imagining it. And I saw that you left the church last year, and I wondered. More silence. Long enough that I thought she might have hung up. Then, what was your husband's name? Kenneth. Kenneth Carlisle. He died 8 months ago. I remember him, Lenora said softly. Nice man. Always helped set up the chairs for Wednesday night services. My throat tightened. Yes, that was Kenneth. My husband died 2 years ago, she said. Heart attack. It was sudden, no warning at all. I'm very sorry. Pastor Roland was incredibly kind during that time, she said. He visited me every single week for months. He helped me through the absolute darkest period of my life. My heart sank. She was going to defend him. She was going to tell me I was wrong. But then her voice changed. It dropped lower, trembling with shame. He suggested I donate to the missionary outreach program in Central America, she whispered. He said my husband had always talked about wanting to do mission work but never had the chance. He said this donation would be his legacy, his lasting contribution to God's kingdom. I held my breath. How much, Lenora? $175,000. The world stopped spinning for a moment. $175,000. Have you seen any evidence of the program? Any photos or updates? 2 full years, she said, her voice breaking. 2 years of asking for photos, updates, anything at all. All I ever get are vague responses about political instability in the region and logistical complications. He tells me that all I need to do is to trust God's perfect timing, and he makes me feel like I'm being impatient and ungrateful for demanding proof. You're not crazy, I said, tears streaming down my face. He did the exact same thing to me. The same tactics, the same words. It's like he was following a script. I thought I was the only one, she wept. I thought I had just made a terrible mistake. You didn't. He stole from us. We talked for an hour. Then I called the next name on the list. One woman hung up on me immediately. One threatened to call the police. But the third woman, Camille, listened. Camille's husband had died 8 months ago from a massive stroke, leaving her with a significant estate and no children. Roland had announced just last month that Camille had generously donated $225,000 for the church's new community health clinic. She described a beautiful rendering: modern medical facility, exam rooms, and mental health counseling. But no construction had started. Not a single shovel had broken ground. When she asked Roland, he hugged her and told her to trust the process. "I'll meet you," Camille said when I told her about Lenora. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. There's a cafe downtown called Miller's. It's far from the church." The next morning, I drove to Miller's Cafe, doing 20 miles an hour under the speed limit and testing my brakes at every stop sign, terrified the pedal would go to the floor. I had paid a mechanic to check the lines that morning, but the fear was still there. I arrived 15 minutes early, chose a corner booth with a clear view of the door, ordered coffee I couldn't drink, and watched every person who walked in. At exactly 10 a.m., 2 elderly women entered together. They looked around nervously, clutching their purses like they were doing something illicit. I stood up and waved. They saw me, exchanged a glance, and walked over. "Vivian?" the first one asked. She was small, frail, with white hair. "Lenora." "Yes, Lenora." She nodded and gestured to the woman beside her, who looked elegant but tired. "This is Camille. We decided to come together. Safety in numbers." We sat down. For a long moment, nobody spoke. 3 widows in a booth, united by grief and a secret shame we had carried alone until this moment. Finally, I pulled out my folder and laid out the architect's rendering, the permit office rejection, and the photo of me being stalked. "Tell us everything," Camille said. So I did. I told them about the empty lot, the fake firm, the threats, and the starter fuse. When I finished, Camille was openly crying. He did the same thing to me, every single word, and every tactic. It's like he was reading from a manual. "He was," I said. "This isn't improvised. This is systematic. He's done this before." "What do we do now?" Lenora asked, wiping her eyes. "We fight back," I said. "We build a case so strong that even the police can't ignore it. We find the money." 3 days later, Fletcher called again. His voice carried an urgency I hadn't heard before. "I found something major," he said. "Meet me. Same place. Bring Lenora and Camille if they're willing. They need to see this too." An hour later, the 3 of us sat in that same corner booth with Fletcher's laptop casting a pale blue glow across our faces. "I've been digging deeper," Fletcher said, "following the money trail from the shell companies, and I found records indicating that Roland served as pastor at churches in 3 other states before Connecticut: Minnesota, Iowa, and Illinois." He pulled up a spreadsheet. "The pattern is identical every single time. He stays 3 to 5 years, targets wealthy widows, launches a building project, and collects the funds, then relocates to a new church just before anyone catches on." "How many?" I whispered. "In Connecticut alone? 7 confirmed victims," Fletcher said, "including you 3. Total stolen $2 million. $2 million. But across all 4 states," Fletcher scrolled down, "I've identified at least 10 more potential victims. Conservative estimate? Somewhere between $5 and $8 million stolen over 15 years. $8 million. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. This was a career. Roland Hutchins had been perfecting this for a decade. "There's one more thing," Fletcher said, his voice dropping, "and this part is hard to hear." He pulled out a file with older documents, police reports from Iowa and Minnesota. 2 of the women who threatened to expose Roland in his previous churches are now dead. Ice flooded my veins. "What?" "Subject C in Des Moines, 2017. She became suspicious after 8 months, threatened to go to the authorities. She died 3 months later, fell down her basement stairs, and this was ruled accidental." He slid another report forward. Subject H in Hartford 2019. Question project delays. Hired a lawyer, had a sudden severe decline in health 4 months later, and died of a medication interaction. Investigation closed. Camille's hand flew to her mouth. Are you saying he killed them? I'm saying 2 women who became problems for him ended up dead in accidents, Fletcher said grimly. I can't prove murder, but the pattern makes me extremely uncomfortable. I thought about the footsteps on my porch and the fuse pulled from my car. He's been watching me and threatening me, I whispered. If he's actually killed before. That's why we have to move fast, Fletcher said. We have 2 options. Go to the police again and hope they listen this time, or we go nuclear. What's nuclear? Lenora asked. I have a contact at the Connecticut Post, Fletcher said. An investigative journalist named Kendra Walsh who specializes in institutional corruption. If we give her everything, the records, your stories, the pattern, she'll run it. Once it's public, the police have to act because they can't ignore the headlines. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a hard whisper. But you need to understand what nuclear actually means, Vivian. Once I hand Kendra that file, there is no going back. You can't change your minds in the middle of the night. Your names will be in print. Roland's lawyers won't just send letters anymore. They will come after you publicly. Half the town will call you heroes, but the other half will call you liars on the front page. It will be a war, and it will get ugly before it gets better. The 3 of us looked at each other. We thought about the shame, the judgment, and the lawsuits. We thought about our quiet lives being ripped open for everyone to see. Then I thought about the woman in Des Moines who fell down the stairs. I thought about the woman in Hartford who died from a medication error. And I realized that a war was coming, whether we started it or not. If we don't stop him, I said, my voice steady, he's going to kill someone else. Or he's going to steal from another widow sitting in a pew right now who is trusting him with her life. Camille took a deep breath, her hand trembling as she placed it on the table. Call the journalist. 2 days later, we met Kendra Walsh in a hotel conference room in New Haven, a neutral territory where nobody from Fairfield County would recognize us. She was in her mid-40s with sharp eyes that missed nothing, and had a digital recorder which was already set up on the conference table when we arrived. We talked for 3 hours straight, all 3 of us taking turns telling the donations we'd made, the promises we'd been given, the fake projects that never materialized, and the gaslighting we endured whenever we asked questions. Fletcher provided documentation for every single claim we made, sliding bank statements, property records, and wire transfer receipts across the table until they formed a paper trail that proved every word coming out of our mouths. Kendra took meticulous notes, asked razor-sharp questions that cut straight to the heart of things, and never once looked at us like we were foolish old women who should have known better. When we finally finished our story, she leaned back in her chair and was quiet for a long moment. This is bigger than local church corruption, she said finally. This is organized fraud targeting vulnerable populations through religious institutions. The national outlets will pick this up within hours of publication. On Sunday morning, the article went live on the Connecticut Post website at exactly 6 a.m. My phone started ringing at 6:03. The headline was brutal and direct. Fairfield County pastor accused of stealing millions from grieving widows in systematic 15-year fraud scheme. Below it was my face, my name, and my entire story laid bare for the world to see and judge. Below that were the stories of 7 other women who'd found the courage to speak their truth publicly. The phone calls came in relentless waves, media outlets wanting interviews, lawyers offering services, and former church members emerging from silence with either support or vicious judgment. One text was from Sienna Marsh, just 4 words that somehow contained more menace than the explicit threats. You'll regret this. I pulled the battery out of my phone entirely, the old-fashioned way, so no one could reach me, and I sat in the silence of Kenneth's house waiting for the fallout. By 10 in the morning, cars started arriving at my house. Not reporters and not angry church members. It was Lenora, then Camille, then women I didn't know. Women emerging from vehicles with out-of-state license plates who had driven for hours because they'd read that article and recognized their own stories reflected back at them. By noon, 11 women stood in my living room, 11 grieving widows, and nearly $3 million stolen from us collectively. But standing together in that room, we were something Roland Hutchins hadn't anticipated in his careful planning. We were united, we were angry, and we weren't going away quietly. The article forced the police department's hand because public pressure combined with media attention made inaction politically impossible. Federal prosecutors took over the case entirely, and Roland was arrested the next morning at 6:30 a.m. He wasn't the only one. Eugene Kraft, Delilah Voss, and Garrett Sloan were taken into custody within the hour. And the united front they had presented in the boardroom crumbled before they even reached the station. They turned on each other viciously, trading secrets for plea deals, and were desperate to avoid the wreckage they had helped create. Garrett admitted to falsifying the financial documents, and Delilah gave up the locations of the irrevocable trusts in the Cook Islands, hoping that betraying Roland would buy her mercy. 2 days after the arrest, Fletcher called me. His voice wasn't triumphant, it was grim. Federal agents searched Roland's home office yesterday as part of the evidence collection, he said. They found something hidden in a locked drawer behind his theological books. You need to see it, Vivian. You, Lenora, and Camille. An hour later, we sat in Fletcher's office. He had cleared his desk completely, except for one item in the center. A leather-bound journal with a black cover and a gold-embossed cross on the front. What I'm about to show you is evidence that will be used in the trial, Fletcher said quietly. But it's also proof of something I suspected but couldn't prove until now. It's a manual, a hunting guide. He opened the journal to the first page. The title was written in Roland's distinctive, elegant handwriting, Pastoral Care Strategy, Grief Ministry Optimization. My stomach turned over. He turned to the next page. Phase 1, Identification. I read the text below, my vision blurring around the edges. Target widows within 6 months of loss. Estate valued at minimum $200,000. High isolation, no children nearby, and limited family support. Vulnerability indicators, crying during service, sitting alone, and mentions of feeling lost or purposeless. Roland had been watching us all. He had been studying us like specimens, selecting prey with the cold calculation of a predator circling wounded animals. Fletcher turned to another page. Phase 2, Approach. Initial contact within 72 hours of funeral. Bring food, homemade preferred. Physical touch essential. Hand-holding, shoulder touch, brief hugs. Mirror their grief language precisely. Use deceased's name frequently, and establish pastoral authority through prayer and strategic scripture. Every word felt like a knife sliding between my ribs. The casserole, the hug, the way he used Kenneth's name. It was all scripted. There's more, Fletcher said, flipping to a section near the middle where there were handwritten notes in the margins about specific women. I saw my name before Fletcher could warn me. Vivian Carlisle was written in bold red ink at the top of a full page. Funeral on June 6. Observation. Isolated, no children present, and crying openly during the eulogy. High vulnerability confirmed. Estate estimate over $300,000 based on property records. She is a priority target. Just below that, June 9th. Delivered casserole personally. She cried when I hugged her and mentioned feeling lost without him. Physical touch was well received. Proceed immediately to phase 3. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just theft. It was science. It was the optimization of human suffering for maximum financial extraction. Roland had turned grief into a business model, and he had refined it over 15 years. Fletcher turned one last page to the back. Risk management. Prioritize targets with pre-existing medical conditions when possible. Post-surgical patients particularly ideal. Medication complications provide natural exit strategy if subject becomes problematic. Elderly women with multiple prescriptions represent low risk for intervention. I looked at Camille and Lenora. We thought about the two dead women Fletcher had told us about, the fall down the stairs and the medication error. We realized then, with absolute clarity, that we hadn't just lost money. We had survived a serial killer who used neglect and stress as his weapon of choice. The trial came 6 months later. The federal courthouse in New Haven was bigger and more intimidating than I'd expected, smelling like old wood polish and generations of human anxiety. Roland sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, though he still managed to look composed. His hair was perfectly styled, and he sat there looking completely relaxed and almost serene, like a man at a church social rather than a defendant facing decades in federal prison. When I took the witness stand, our eyes met for the first time since the article had been published. I expected to see anger, hatred, or fear, at least some flicker of emotion acknowledging what he'd done. Instead, I saw nothing, just cold calculation. The same look a chess player gives a piece about to be sacrificed. The prosecutor walked me through my entire story, and I told it all. The fake rendering, the empty lot, the threats, and the isolation. How did it feel, the prosecutor asked, when you discovered the youth center was never real? I looked directly at Roland. It felt like drowning while everyone around you insists you're perfectly fine, I said, my voice steady. It felt like realizing the person you trusted most in your grief had been feeding on your pain like a parasite from the very first moment. Victim after victim took the stand. 17 women. 17 stories that mirrored mine with devastating precision. Fletcher testified for an entire day, walking the jury through every document, every wire transfer, every shell company, and finally, the Black Book. When the jury heard the entries from the journal, the specific notes about vulnerability indicators and extraction targets, Roland's defense fell apart like wet paper. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Finally, the foreperson stood. We find the defendant, Roland Hutchins, guilty on all counts. Guilty. 37 times over. Wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, and elder abuse. The courtroom erupted, but Roland's face remained completely blank. He showed no remorse, no recognition, and no fear. Even as the bailiffs moved in with handcuffs, he maintained that terrifying serenity. He wasn't even sorry he hurt us. He was just annoyed that his business model had been interrupted. The sentencing came 2 months later. The judge, a woman with sharp eyes who had seen too many predators stand before her bench, sentenced Roland to 25 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for 15 years. He would be an old man before he ever saw the sun as a free citizen again. Sienna Marsh, the woman with the ice-cold eyes who had helped him pick his targets, pled guilty to conspiracy. She received 8 years. The last time I saw her, the arrogance was finally gone. As for the board members, Eugene, Delilah, and Garrett, their loyalty to Roland evaporated the moment the handcuffs clicked. They testified against him to save their own skins, trading their silence for 5-year sentences in minimum security, but they didn't escape the ruin. They lost their homes to pay the restitution, lost their standing in the community, and will spend the rest of their lives being the people who stole from widows in the name of God. Federal agents seized everything: the offshore accounts, the properties, the luxury items. Everything was liquidated and divided among the victims. I received $163,000 back. It wasn't the full amount, but it was enough to save my house. 6 months after the trial, Tessa Pemberton called me. She had used her recovered funds to buy an old strip mall in Stamford. I'm building something real, she said. A community center with free financial counseling for widows, grief support groups, and legal aid for fraud victims. Everything we needed and couldn't find. The center opened on a clear Saturday in October. Above the entrance, carved in stone, were two names, Kenneth Carlisle and Thomas Pemberton. That night, I finally took the cheap bronze plaque Roland had given me, the one I had kept in a box in the garage, and I threw it into the recycling bin. I didn't need it anymore. Kenneth's legacy wasn't metal with his name etched into it. His legacy was every woman who would walk through those center doors and find actual help instead of a predator. Roland Hutchins is now in a cell, staring at concrete walls, but there are other Rolands out there. They are watching the obituaries, and they are practicing their smiles in the mirror, waiting for the next funeral. But we are waiting too. We are the widows they thought were weak, the women they thought were invisible, and we are never ever going to be silent again. You've made it to the end. You walked through the fire with Vivian. But I have to be honest, it breaks my heart when I see people listen to these stories, feel these heavy emotions, and then just walk away. No subscription, no support, just silence. It feels like I'm pouring my soul into a void, working days and nights to bring these voices to life, only to be met with ghost viewers. Please, don't be another ghost. If this story kept you company, don't just take it and leave. You owe it to the story to leave a mark. A subscribe, a super thanks, or even just comment in your city. Tell me where in the world you are listening from. Let me know exactly where my voice is traveling, so I know I'm not alone in this. And if you aren't ready to leave yet, don't. There are 2 more real-life journeys right here on your screen. Pick one. Stay with me a little longer. Don't let the silence win. Until next time.